In 2008, the residents of Novo-Lenin in Irkutsk were shocked to learn that maniacs were living nearby. From January to June, a gang made up of teenagers operated in this neighborhood. They committed 13 crimes, 5 of which were murders. It all started when 22-year-old Konstantin Shumkov decided to find himself a new group of friends. Kostya gathered around himself guys who were 14 and 15 years old. All the criminals lived in the same courtyard in the Leninsky district. He offered 4 boys an interesting way to spend their free time, to take lives, force sexual acts, and rob helpless people. According to eyewitnesses, namely the teachers of school number 30 where the teenagers studied, all the boys came from troubled families, skipped classes, and barely studied. All the guys grew up without fathers, and by the age of 15, 3 of the boys already had criminal records for theft. Only the 4th boy avoided punishment because, at that time, he had not yet reached the age covered by the criminal code. That's why Kostya Shumkov became a role model for them. The guys obeyed him without question. Konstantin was born in Kazakhstan and then moved to Irkutsk with his mother. He grew up there. With his father long gone, his mother stayed out of her son's affairs, especially since he gave her little reason to intervene. He did well in school, behaved well, and was a bit reserved. After finishing school, the young man enrolled in a teacher training college but was expelled during his first year. He knew how to connect with teenagers, and perhaps that's why he was able to quickly find common ground with a group of homeless kids. He was registered at the district military enlistment office, but despite being draft age, he was never called up. After being expelled from the institute, the guy worked as a disc jockey at a local bar, then installed plastic windows at an auto repair shop. The first victim of the gang was a lonely, heavy-drinking old man who was living out his days in his apartment. That's why he was always glad to have guests, especially if they didn't come empty-handed. The guys from the gang started visiting him often. On that fateful day, they once again visited the pensioner, knocked, came in, and carried out the execution. That's how succinctly Konstantin described the first bloody operation of the group he led during the interrogation. There were 3 other guys in the apartment besides Kostya. According to the leader's testimony, at first we were just drinking, and when the alcohol ran out, we simply beat him to death with bats. The second crime of the small group, which is how Shumkov referred to his gang, caused a wide public outcry in Irkutsk. On a May morning in 2008, parts of a human body were scattered all over the grounds of school number 30. That day, some classes even had to be cancelled to avoid traumatizing the children.
He opened the chest cavity, removed the contents, and set them nearby.
The mutilated body was later found in the boiler room of the nearby heating plant. Then, in the same area, another body was found in a sewer manhole. At that time, unfortunately, the perpetrators could not be found. Investigators were only able to reconstruct the events during the interrogation of the suspects. According to the testimony of Konstantin, the first victim was killed by 4 people. Everything happened in the boiler room. They beat him and left him to die, then the idea to dismember the body came up. They went back together. When we arrive, another person is there, looking at the body. He was already showing no signs of life. They undressed the man and laid him in the middle of the boiler room. Then Konstantin began the operation with a utility knife. His partner illuminated the scene with a pocket flashlight. The second resident of the boiler room watched everything. The second homeless man watched as they gutted his comrade. They put everything in a bag, took a smoke break. Hey, come join us. He agreed, grabbed the bag, and got up. But my accomplice decided to do it his own way. He beat him to death with a stick, the handle of a shovel, knocked him out, then made a hole in his skull. They threw the body into a well and left, and scattered the first victim's insides around the school grounds. Shumkov was giving his testimony. During the investigation, it was revealed that the criminals initially planned to plant human body parts at the district police department as a prank but got scared, according to investigator Olga Aksamentova. She had to unravel the bloody deeds of the Novo-Leninsk butchers. The investigation lasted almost 10 months, and at the beginning of April it was handed over to the court. They proved 13 criminal acts by the gang members. These included 5 murders, 3 serious assaults, 1 abuse case, 4 car thefts, 2 car burnings, and 2 cars smashed and abandoned. By the way, the young people handled the car-related crimes without their older companion. Such petty things bored him. Konstantin was only interested in especially serious crimes, the kind that make your blood run cold, like
how a person dies, what happens, how it manifests, what it means for oneself, knowledge.
Here's another of his comments about a case of taking a life. While walking through Novo-Lenin, we noticed two men in the bushes, homeless people resting. Simply put, there were 3 of us, and we were already intoxicated. We offered them a drink, they agreed, got up and went with us. One walked ahead, the other followed. The follower quickly ran off, seemingly suspicious. The other acted friendly, like a buddy. We reached the area just behind. My friends and I call it the Valley of Death. It's beautiful, so green, with little fences, all fenced in. It was getting dark. I went to get firewood for the campfire. When I came back, my buddies were already throwing stones at a homeless man, and he was lying there drunk, snoring. They woke him up and brought him to his senses. He came to and said, "I don't feel well, everything hurts." Then I suggested he sit in the campfire. He refused, so we forced him to sit there. As a result, the man died from severe burns that were incompatible with life. In June 2008, another body of an unidentified elderly woman was found on the outskirts of Novo-Lenin. A criminal case was promptly opened for this incident. Very soon, the detectives of the Leninsky District Police Department managed to track down the suspected criminals. There were witnesses who saw several young men carrying the body of the victim, who, by the way, turned out to be a half-crazed old woman born in 1943 with no fixed place of residence. It should be noted that, as it later turned out, the criminals completely lacked not only any sense of pity, but also any sense of disgust. Before taking the elderly woman's life, they abused her. 3 other victims of the criminal campaign were luckier. They survived after being beaten with shovels and hoes and left unconscious to die. One man had 2 fingers cut off, which Konstantin Shumkov for some reason kept at home under the printer lid. He also kept the preserved eye of another victim.
But
these crimes don't occur randomly. Later, it was revealed the gang leader began by abusing animals, starting with pigeons. It all started when I found a little chick, raised it, and released it in the attic. However, the local inhabitants didn't accept the outsider and pecked it to death. Next, I shut all the attic doors and windows, caught every bird inside, and finished them off. Then there were the dogs. The first one I hanged at first, then I butchered it, gutted it, and hung up the entrails. There wasn't really a purpose, just to see. I don't like dogs. All of this is from Konstantin's interrogation transcript. On the outside, he seemed like a normal, educated guy. He spoke well and clearly had obvious leadership qualities. During interrogation, he stayed calm and sometimes smiled. I caught a medium-sized yard terrier. I had a switchblade, I slit its throat, found a little clay skull with a pattern on it, drained the blood into it, cut off the tail, and used it to write the abbreviation MK on the kindergarten wall. Konstantin Mali also talked about this, the collective, or blood magic, whichever you prefer. According to the leader, that was supposed to be their organization's name. And shortly before his arrest, the adult shared with his young comrades the ideology he came up with, to carry out a purge of the city from homeless people. He admitted to the investigator that he sees himself as a maniac. If he hadn't been detained, he would have continued to take lives. He underwent 2 outpatient psychiatric evaluations and 1 psychological evaluation to determine the reasons for his criminal tendencies, says Olga Aksamentova. According to the specialist's conclusion, he does not have any mental illnesses, although certain abnormalities are present, a tendency to commit crimes, a tendency toward cruelty. Nevertheless, he has been found fit to bear punishment. Shumkov said all the killings were committed out of curiosity. The gang, the blood magic gang, made up mostly of school children, tortured and killed people for fun. Reviewing this case's materials is simply overwhelming and horrifying. Ordinary boys in every Irkutsk neighborhood found a terrible pastime, destroying people. Choosing their victims from the unprotected, mainly the homeless, the young monsters did more than kill. They tortured, beat with sticks, kicked, mutilated, and forced victims to sit in fire while still alive. As a result, the underage criminals are responsible for 5 human lives. The police called this gang one of the most brutal and dangerous in the entire history of Irkutsk. They believed that everything was allowed to them. The best detectives worked on the investigation. As a result, on March 1, 2010, the Irkutsk Regional Court sentenced Shumkov to 25 years in prison. He'll serve 10 years in prison and 15 in a high-security penal colony. 19-year-old Roman Burmakov, another teenager, was sentenced to 10 years in a juvenile correctional facility. Denis Sokolnikov, 19, was sentenced to 9 years in a general regime colony, while 18-year-old Nikolai Chesnikov received 6.5 years in a juvenile facility. Alexei Shandora, 14 at the time of the crime, was sentenced to 6 years. Some of the gang members have already been released, but nothing is known about their further fate. The Moscow police have started searching for 64-year-old Valery Andreev, one of the most dangerous and wanted criminals in Russia. Investigators suspect that Andreev, known as the Orsk Maniac, killed more than 100 people over 7 years from 2006 to 2013. In 2012, Andreev was even detained but was soon released due to a lack of evidence. He disappeared, and now Interpol is searching for the Orsk Maniac, with the Ministry of Internal Affairs offering a 1 million ruble reward for information. Investigators recently learned the serial killer may be hiding in the capital. Valery Andreev was born on April 10, 1957 in the village of Shalkarsky, Svetlinsky district, Orenburg region. After finishing school, he learned the profession of a driver and then worked as a long-haul trucker for 15 years. In Orsk, where Andreev moved from his native village and from which he got his nickname, he was considered a law-abiding citizen. He was never prosecuted, and he hardly had any administrative violations either. In many years of working as a driver, he was only cited 3 times for speeding and never had a single accident. Andreev was known in Orsk as a model family man and father of 2, with no issues related to alcohol or drugs. Neighbors described him as a decent and polite person who easily gained people's trust and made a good impression. However, despite such positive characteristics, some of Andreev's colleagues and co-workers noted one detail. According to them, since the mid-2000s, Andreev struggled to communicate and experienced psychological discomfort. As a result, he reportedly reduced communication with colleagues and preferred working alone on long-haul trips, without partners or trucker convoys. Later, the investigation showed Andreev's routes followed the Orenburg-Chelyabinsk and Samara-Orenburg highways. Most alleged victims of the Orsk Maniac disappeared near these roads. Usually, these were women from Orsk and the villages of Novosergievka, Kamenus-Yornaya, Tazbulak and Mozarovka. All these settlements are located in close proximity to the highways that the truck driver Andreev used to travel on. According to the investigation, he committed at least 7 murders. The genetic material of the victims of these crimes was found during a search of Andreev's property. In total, the investigation suspects the Orsk Maniac from Orenburg of being involved in the murders of more than 100 victims between 2006 and 2013. Law enforcement authorities believe that Valery Andreev committed his crimes according to the same pattern. The truck driver would offer a ride to a young woman who was walking along the road, standing at a bus stop, or hitchhiking on the roadside. The grey-haired and seemingly good-natured man did not arouse any suspicion in his victims, but such rides ended with rape and murder in the forest. At the same time, Andreev chose a certain type of women, preferring young and slender ones. Investigators quickly connected the murders by the Orenburg Maniac, whose victims were found in forest belts along highways, and began searching for suspects. On September 30, 2013, near Jantalap village by the Orsk-Chelyabinsk highway, the partially buried remains of 18-year-old Olga Zhuravlyova were found, her skull and bone fragments. She went missing on June 30th, 2012. At that time, investigators interviewed witnesses and they said they saw the girl get into a Sangyong SUV before she disappeared. The car was tracked by cameras and it turned out that it had arrived in Orsk. The investigation showed that there were only 2 cars in the city matching the description, and one of them was registered to Valery Andreev. According to billing data, Andreev and Zhuravlev were in the same place shortly before her disappearance. In early July 2012, the truck driver was detained and questioned. At the time, investigators lacked direct evidence, so the suspect was released. The maniac didn't give the witnesses another chance. Even though the investigator released Andreev, he remained a suspect. His personal car, garage and work truck were searched. Biological traces and several washed bloodstains were found in the vehicles. In Andreev's garage, the police found bloodied hammers, knives and fishing lines. During interviews, the trucker's colleagues shared their long-standing suspicions. They believed that Andreev used the services of prostitutes. The thing is, contraceptives, jewelry, women's underwear, hairpins, and other women's hair and clothing accessories were repeatedly noticed in his vehicle. After these stories, Andreev was summoned for questioning again but did not appear. On July 6, 2012, he called his wife for the last time, after which he disappeared. Soon, he was declared wanted. Because of his work, the suspect had repeatedly visited Samara, Chelyabinsk, Orenburg, and Nizhny Novgorod. Therefore, the investigators first started their search activities there, but they did not yield any results. After Andreev's information appeared online, reports about the maniac came in from across the country. People reported that the serial killer was seen in Leningrad Oblast, St. Petersburg, and Krasnoyarsk. The police did not confirm this information, but they were also in no hurry to deny it. Andreev's escape shocked his family, who refused to believe a murderer had lived among them. The Orsk maniac is still on the federal wanted list as a particularly dangerous criminal. The Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs offers 1 million rubles for his capture, while the Orenburg region governor promises $500,000 for useful information. And on December 3rd, 2019, Andreev was added to Interpol's list of most wanted persons. The list, published on Interpol's website, was compiled for the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. It included 8 people wanted for alleged crimes against women, including murder. The list includes citizens of Russia, Ukraine, Denmark, Norway, Brazil, Cyprus, and the United States. In addition to Andreev, it also included another Russian, 37-year-old Nuran Musaev, who is wanted for the brutal murder of 2 women. Reports that the Orsk maniac has been seen in various regions of Russia are still coming in. In August last year, local residents saw the serial killer in Krasnoyarsk, and the Regional Ministry of Internal Affairs posted the suspect's photo and description online. On March 11, media reported the Orsk maniac was being sought in Moscow. The police sent out a wanted notice for Andreev. The investigation received information that he might be hiding in the capital region. Soon this information was confirmed by eyewitnesses. Moskovsky Komsomolets published a student's account of seeing a composite sketch of Valery Andreev and recalling spotting him in Odintsovo near Moscow. The girl said that on March 10th around 5 p.m. she was returning from her studies, boarded a bus and saw an elderly man enter right after her. He sat across from the student, looked at her and soon asked where she was from and where she was going. The girl remembered that the stranger was missing many teeth and some of his teeth were gold. She also noted that the man's clothes were dirty, as if they hadn't been changed for a long time. The student realized who she had met when a composite sketch of the maniac was posted at the university 2 days later. She then went straight to the police. Meanwhile, law enforcement agencies have no objective information that the Orsk maniac might be hiding in the Moscow region. The investigation into the series of crimes against women in the Orenburg region is ongoing. The source says the search has continued for years, and in early 2021 it was intensified due to something involving 5. The case materials were re-examined and additional measures were planned to catch the maniac. A new updated portrait of the wanted person was made in 2021, considering age changes and possible attempts to alter his appearance. This description was sent out by the local police department. The investigation does not have any confirmed information about the whereabouts of Valery Andreev. Over all these years, he has not made a single attempt to contact his family, his wife, or his adult sons. Several times, the investigation checked information that Andreev was serving a sentence under a different surname in places of detention. There were reports that he had left for one of the neighboring countries, but none of these messages were objectively confirmed. It is possible that the maniac has died. As someone without any criminal experience, he can't hide for so long without coming to the attention of law enforcement. Alongside Andreev, other suspects were investigated for the numerous women's murders, but they were found innocent during the investigation. That's why today Andreev is the main suspect in these crimes. Regarding reports of the Orsk maniac in Odintsovo near Moscow, only one girl's statement exists, with no other evidence so far that it was Andreev. Surveillance footage is under review, but no trace of the serial killer has been found so far. The Pakistani maniac Javed Iqbal became notorious not only for the brutality of his crimes and the large number of victims, but also for the judge's admission, when passing sentence, that the punishments available in the criminal code were not enough to take revenge on the criminal for all his atrocities. This criminal story took place in Lahore, the second largest city in Pakistan. On the morning of December 12, 1999, the duty officer at the police department began going through the delivered mail. Opening one of the envelopes, he read the message and was stunned. No, only a cynical prankster or someone mentally ill could have written something like that. Imagine confessing to the murder of 100 boys. However, duty is duty, and the officer pressed the selector button, calling the department for the investigation of especially serious crimes. And 5 minutes later, Inspector Mustafa Redzi burst into the duty office. He grabbed the sheet and read aloud, "I, Javed Iqbal, killed 100 children I hated and still hate this world. I am not ashamed and am ready to die. Before killing them, I raped the children." All the details are in the diary and the 32-page notebook that are in the room, and copies of which have been sent to the authorities. This is my confession. Now I intend to take my own life, and I hope that the Vedas of Ravi will accept my sinful body, and that merciful Allah will grant me forgiveness. Inspector Redzi wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. No, unlike his colleague, he was sure that he was holding a message from a real maniac, for the simple reason that the author's name was very familiar to him. The 43-year-old engineer Javed Iqbal, a businessman and the son of a well-known developer, had already come to the attention of the police a year and a half ago, and it was Inspector Redzi who handled his case. At that time, a police patrol in the suburbs of Lakhara detained a middle-aged, well-dressed, suspicious man who was talking to 2 teenagers. He seemed suspicious, not because he was treating the young slum dwellers to expensive baklava, but because when both of them shook their heads no, the stranger grabbed one of them by the hand and started dragging him toward his Mercedes. Law enforcement had to intervene. At the police station, the man's identity was established and it turned out to be Javed Iqbal. And the boys said that the man promised each of them 20 rupees if they agreed to take a bath with him at his house, and also to feed them to their fill. In turn, the detainee began to claim that he was misunderstood. He said that his heart breaks when he sees such unfortunate children who not only live in unsanitary conditions but also cannot eat their fill. Ray G did not believe the philanthropist and planned to arrest him for suspected sexual harassment of teenagers. But then the Faisal family's lawyer Najib Chaudhry rushed in and began assuring the law enforcement officer that a respected man like Iqbal, a graduate of a prestigious college, an engineer, the owner of a well-known company producing and selling metal fittings that has existed since 1978, could not have fallen so low. After some hesitation, the prosecutor also agreed with the defense, as a result of which the suspect was released on substantial bail. And Reiji? The management hinted that it would be more reasonable if the inspector put the file in the cabinet and forgot about its existence. There's a new twist in the case. Naturally, the task force immediately went to Iqbal's villa in the Shadbagh area. They didn't find the owner there, but they did find 2 14-year-old teenagers who looked at the uninvited guests like frightened wolf cubs. Evidence from the villa search confirmed the letter's contents were not the ravings of a madman. Numerous bloodstains on the basement walls and on the huge cutting board where the killer dismembered the boys' bodies. A metal chain, barrels of hydrochloric acid in which experts would later find partially dissolved human remains, photographs of corpses, as well as a set of huge knives from a professional butcher's arsenal, a collection of shoes and clothes from the maniac's victims. In addition, the police found a note in which Igral Akbal stated that he deliberately did not destroy the incriminating evidence so that he would be believed more. Unfortunately, the boys detained at the villa remained completely silent during interrogations about the whereabouts of their master, but most likely they simply didn't know about his plans. Therefore, at first, a search of the Ravi River was organized using nets, but the presumed suicide victim's body was missing. Meanwhile, Inspector Redzi and his colleagues delved deeper into studying the maniac's diary. The revelations found there shocked even the seasoned police veteran. All case documents were classified from the start of the investigation. However, Iqbal managed to send a photocopy of his diary to the editorial office of the City Lahore newspaper Daily Jump. For ethical reasons, we can only provide excerpts from this terrifying opus. On February 22, 1999, Said Ahmed, one of the maniac's teenage accomplices, brought a fool who was tempted by sherbet and baklava. He probably didn't even have time to get scared when, instead of a treat, he got a chain around his neck. When I was butchering his body, I imagined I was processing a pig carcass. By the way, we're running out of acid. I need to call and have them bring a couple more canisters. I guess I should find another way to dispose of the remains. Yesterday, the neighbor came by and asked why there's some strange smell coming from my property. Maybe I should just secretly throw the pieces into the river without resorting to chemical treatment. However, disposing of one corpse only cost me $2.40, and then things started to get strange. Javed Iqbal, who had been wanted by the police for almost a month, suddenly appeared at the Daily Junk editorial office on December 30, 1999, and told the staff that he came here to surrender. He didn't trust the police, believing they'd take his life if they arrested him. During interrogations and even at court hearings, Iqbal also behaved quite strangely. He sometimes claimed he could have killed 500 children if he wanted. In revenge for the shame he experienced after his first arrest and accusation of sexual harassment, Tolo claimed he wasn't involved in the murders. He fabricated the story to draw attention to runaway children from poor families, and the police forced a confession of murder out of him during the investigation. However, the judge did not refer these changes in the defendant, evaluated the case, and sentenced Iqbal and his accomplice Said Ahmed to the highest punishment, hanging. Let us clarify that in Pakistan the death penalty is applied to minors who have committed serious crimes. Moreover, after delivering the verdict, the judge added, "If it were up to me, Iqbal should first be strangled in front of the parents of the children he killed. After that, he should be dismembered into 100 pieces and dissolved in acid." Mom, I'm scared. The 6-year-old girl eyed the narrow door with fear. Behind that door lurked the unknown, frightening, unpredictable, chilling. Only one thing calmed her soul. It was locked. The younger girl, who had just turned 4, also looked at her mother with both curiosity and fear. The woman's wary gaze darted around the room. Her eyelids fluttered as they closed, and her lips kept pressing into a thin line. Tiny beads of sweat appeared on the tanned skin of her forehead. "I hope he doesn't find us," she thought to herself, trying to calm her daughters. A few grey strands on her head, escaping from the thick mass of black hair, glistened with a metallic sheen. After a while, the girls were already peacefully asleep, settled on the old shabby sofa, which was the only decoration in this summer annex. Now their faces showed pure tranquility. Sleep enveloped their minds in a light haze with a taste of cotton candy, chocolate-covered sweets, and the distinct scent of soap bubbles. What more could children dream of than this? Sleep tore them away from the cruel world of reality and, for a moment, transported them to a place where everyone is happy, well-fed, and cheerful. Mother was awake. She stayed vigilant, keeping her eyes fixed on the heavy wooden planks that made up the door. Outside there was only a barely perceptible mist and the crackling of dry branches disturbed by the cold autumn wind. Secretly, she also watched the children, worrying most of all about their fate. Inside her, in her belly, another heart was beating. The tiny creature felt fear, and imitating its mother, was also afraid, though it didn't know why. Suddenly there was a loud knock. The woman grabbed her head. He had found them. What should she do? She stood in the middle of the cramped room, afraid to move. Her breath caught, her heart sank, her hands turned cold and clammy. The knocking became more insistent, rougher, louder. There was no doubt left. It was him. In the first moments of what had happened, Maria, that was the woman's name, tried not to give any sign that a living soul was present in this small annex. Soon she heard not just knocking but also constant foul language. In a brazen tone they demanded that the door be opened immediately, seasoning the request with choice curses. The woman found the strength to respond, and against the backdrop of that hellish cacophony coming from outside, her voice sounded like the ringing of a clear stream. She shouted, "Go away!" The person who was rudely banging on the door was Maria's husband. That blunt "go away" finished his transformation into a monster, now a daily ritual. He really did leave, but he came back later. Wielding a huge axe, the man aimed at the wooden boards and smashed the core of the door into splinters with one blow. The next two blows came fast, sending sawdust flying like a skilled lumberjack at work. The fourth blow made the desired hole in the door, and the terrifying figure of Stefan Svitek instantly appeared before Maria. Lowering the axe, the man came closer to her and began to spit out the familiar curses, accusing her of not letting him in. This time, Maria didn't answer him, and on top of that, turned away. The terrible face of her husband, distorted by anger, terrified her. This drove Svitek mad. In front of him was no longer his wife, but once again a door, faceless and soulless. He raised the axe like an executioner and struck his wife with all his might. Maria fell, but this didn't stop Svitek. He began to drive the axe into the fragile body of the woman. Fresh blood stained the top of her dress. He targeted her left temple, chin and neck. The axe swung through the air like a deadly pendulum. Maria died quickly. Red liquid outlined the shape of her tall figure. Her head was almost severed from her body. There was a rustling sound in the far corner of the annex. It was the daughters waking up, half asleep, unaware of what had happened. Svitek didn't give them a chance to react. The axe was still burning in his hand like a consuming torch. He ran up to the girls. The older one was closer to him, so she was the first to receive 3 blows to the head, and then she fell dead. The younger one hid her face in her hands, sobbing pitifully. The monster was indifferent. The axe came down on her and in an instant crushed the little girl's body. Now all 3 corpses lay quietly on the floor. Before Svitek's eyes, the pool of blood was turning into a whole lake. He stood in the middle of it and enjoyed the sight. Everything inside him stirred. His temples grew hot, his veins swelled and writhed like snakes along his arms. A sweet taste appeared in his mouth. The sight of blood excited him and he wanted more. Svitek left the annex and entered the house. There in the kitchen he pulled out a drawer and took out several kitchen knives. The razor-sharp blades reflected the sinister glow that stretched across the entire length of the evening sky. Minutes later, Svitek stood on the floor again, covered in blood. A spark flashed in the air. One of the knives was ready for work. The man squatted next to Maria's body and plunged the blade into her maroon-colored neck, then quickly drew it down all the way to her abdomen. The skin opened up like a jacket with its zipper undone. Svitek tore out the woman's intestines with his bare hands and scattered them around him. Then he cut off both her breasts. The heart of the 6-month-old fetus was still beating. It was barely moving its tiny limbs. The knife approached it. Within minutes, the spark of life vanished. The body was cut open, its remains lying nearby with the mother's entrails. After performing these actions, Svitek experienced physiological arousal, which soon faded away. Once he calmed down, the maniac remembered the bodies of the daughters. He decided to pack them in jute bags and take them to the forest. As soon as Svitek left the house, dragging the terrible burden behind him, blood rushed to his temples like lightning again. He no longer wanted to go to the forest. He turned around and hurried back into the house. In the living room, he dropped the bags and pulled out the bodies. The knives still touched Maria's hair. Some were waiting for their moment of glory, and it finally came. Svitek cut open the abdomens of both daughters and removed their internal organs, placing them right there on the floor. A strong arousal set in, mixed with anger, sadism, and strangely enough, a desire to possess the bodies of the little girls. The maniac committed an act of abuse, first on one corpse, then on the other. That wasn't enough for him, so he began to pleasure himself while simultaneously cutting pieces off the children's bodies and chopping those pieces into even smaller fragments. Having satisfied his lust, Svitek finally got up from the floor and glanced around the room once more. What was once a secluded place for summer family vacations had turned into a real slaughterhouse. After that, the maniac got outside through a hole in the door made with an axe. He washed up, wiped blood off his hands with a sweater, changed, and hid the dirty clothes in a towel. Consumed by dark thoughts, he left the city and went to his parents' abandoned house. Being completely alone, Svitek got drunk and decided to end his life no matter what. But the alcohol spread through his body so quickly that he immediately fell asleep. The next morning, he broke into another house and hid there, thinking that no one would find him. He was still planning to take his own life. A bottle of fortified wine called Alpa, found in a room of the house, helped Svitek get in the mood to carry out his plan. After taking a few sips, he immediately felt stronger and began to carry out what he had planned. The first thing he did was take the knife that was at hand and cut off his own genitals. Then he made a noose on the rafters and tried to climb into it, but the rope couldn't hold his weight. Svitek fell from a great height, hit his head and lost consciousness. When he came to, he heard the sound of a truck and decided to escape. By that time, Maria's relatives had already discovered the bodies, and the police officers faced the task of finding Svitek. They managed to achieve it quickly. Drunk and weakened from blood loss from a deep groin wound, the perpetrator stood by the road where he was caught. Stefan Svitek quickly admitted his actions. The confession was not accompanied by remorse. The maniac did not regret what he had done. He probably thought that this was a normal occurrence. Svitek was born and raised in an unhealthy environment. His father suffered from alcoholism and regularly beat his mother. Even as a teenager, the boy was convicted of several crimes, including theft, animal cruelty, and blackmail. When he was herding cows and bulls, he carried out various acts of cruelty that could harm the livestock, including such sophisticated ones as, for example, depriving a bull of its genitals. He would spend a year in prison, then a year at large, continuing to spread chaos and crime around him. Once, the young Svitek took a mentally disabled woman captive and abused her several times a day. In addition, he was fond of taking painkillers and, like his father, didn't mind drinking. He even went through a course of treatment for alcoholism once. The psychiatric clinic was also like a second home to Svitek. Overall, everything that interested him involved corpses and blood, and his hatred for all living things, especially women and animals, pushed him to commit atrocities. When the young man grew up and it was time to find a bride, he got engaged to a gypsy woman named Maria, who already had a daughter from her first marriage. The couple moved to the city of Brezno in the Banska Bystrica region. The family life that had just begun to settle quickly lost its stability. Svitek's behavior turned aggressive. After he and Maria had a daughter in 1983, he began letting his emotions out and regularly beat his wife and children. On that fateful day, October 30th, 1987, Svitek and his friends chopped wood for the stove for an acquaintance. For this service, they were rewarded with 2 bottles of currant wine. Heading to the local tavern, they finished off the gift and ordered more drinks. Alcoholic ones, of course. The next destination was the Global Gron Hotel, where the friends continued their lavish feast and drank until the place closed. On the way home, completely drunk, Svitek fell asleep on a bench. The cold didn't let him get a good sleep, and tormented by it, he went to his wife and daughters, who had already hidden from him in a shelter that turned out to be unreliable. The regional court in Banska Bystrica sentenced Stefan Svitek to the highest punishment, death penalty. No defense could soften this verdict. On June 8, 1989, Stefan Svitek's long-standing wish was finally fulfilled. He was hanged. Before his death, the man who shocked everyone with his deed, everyone whose heart holds even a drop of compassion, probably breathed a sigh of relief. Just like Bratislava, where this last execution in the history of Czechoslovakia was carried out. Alexander Pichushkin is responsible for 49 lives taken and 3 attempted murders. Pichushkin is better known as the Bitsevsky maniac. Bitsevsky Park is the second largest park in Moscow, a specially protected natural area, a place for walks and dates. Pichushkin operated here, aiming to raise his victim count to 64. That's the exact number of squares on a chessboard. Many believed that the Bitsevsky maniac's dream was to surpass Chikatilo, but Pichushkin himself denied this version. Alexander Pichushkin was born on April 9, 1974 in Mitishchi, Moscow region. The boy's father drank heavily and left before his son turned 1. At first, Pichushkin was raised by his mother and grandfather, but soon his mother neglected her son as she focused on her personal life. She remarried and had a daughter. When Pichushkin turned 2 years old, the family moved to Moscow, settling in the southwest in the Zyuzino district. Alexander grew up unsociable and withdrawn, which made his peers mock him. On top of everything else, in early childhood he had a bad fall from a swing and ended up in the hospital with a traumatic brain injury which caused him to develop speech problems. He confused the sounds esh and s. The family decided to send Sasha to a speech therapy boarding school. I'm expecting comments suggesting the video author should be sent there too. Pichushkin didn't like studying. He was only interested in tennis, checkers and drawing. The schoolboy had a vivid imagination. According to some sources, he even once drew Lenin's head. Because of his rather slender build, Sasha wasn't strong and couldn't stand up for himself. He was once badly beaten and had his mother's moped taken. My life was filled with negativity. I felt like an outsider, but I was alive and wanted to celebrate, yet everyone pushed me away, Pichushkin later recalled. His grandfather, who essentially became his father figure, encouraged Alexander to do sports by installing a pull-up bar in the storage room for him. His grandfather was a true friend and mentor to the young man, but in 1988 he moved in with the woman he loved, which deeply hurt his grandson. Pichushkin saw this as a betrayal. From that time on, aggression began to show in the 14-year-old teenager. He attacked younger and weaker kids. Pichushkin grabbed one of them by the legs and threatened to smash the head of the boarding school. Alexander went to study carpentry at the local vocational school, and in his free time he wrote poems, which always made his peers mock him. Then Pichushkin tried to win their favor, generously lending money to anyone who wanted it. However, before that, he would take a written note from future debtors. "I'm leaving this life voluntarily because it's meaningless," the creditor explained. "If you don't pay back the money, I'll take your life, and people will think you took your own life." And in 1992, Pichushkin chose to destroy people. He was pushed to this by the trial that was taking place at that time against the most famous maniac of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Andrei Chikatilo. The Rostov Ripper became Pichushkin's idol. He collected all the information about the maniac. Alexander wore the same checkered shirts as Chikatilo, completing the look with army boots. He prepared for 3 months to kill his friend. At the end of July 1992, Pichushkin suggested to Adichuk that they look for a spot in Bitsevsky Park where they could later lure their first victim. Bitsevsky Forest is meant for 2 things, for murder and for love, Alexander said later. Adichuk agreed to go to the park, unaware he was searching for his own grave. After discovering a well in the forest, Pichushkin attacked his unsuspecting friend, who didn't resist. Alexander threw a nylon rope around Adichuk's neck, and when his companion died from asphyxiation, he dumped the body into the well and went home. Adichuk's body was never recovered. Relatives reported Mikhail's disappearance to the police. The officers questioned his classmates and found out that the student, like many others, had borrowed money from Pichushkin and had written a strange note. Alexander was one of the first people investigators questioned about the mysterious disappearance, but Pichushkin denied his involvement. He denied it, and with no evidence, the case quickly became cold. Meanwhile, Pichushkin realized that in the future he might not have enough physical strength to overpower his next victim. Then he remembered his grandfather's pull-up bar, started working out actively and began building muscle mass. The maniac didn't rush to commit new crimes. The emotions from the first time were too strong. The first murder is like a first love. I was under the impression for a very long time after taking the life of someone close to me. That's what he would explain during the investigation. Handsome and fit, Alexander was liked by girls, but his mother couldn't remember him ever dating anyone. But the woman did remember a love note from one of his classmates. His mother believed that her Sasha was always drawn to older men because he grew up without a father. And when his grandfather found a new partner and moved out, Alexander felt betrayed once again. Despite his excellent health and physical strength, Alexander was not drafted into the army. The draft board sent him to the Kashchenko Psychiatric Hospital. According to his mother, Sasha came back from there a different person. At the age of 22, Pichushkin became addicted to alcohol. He got so drunk he couldn't reach his apartment and had to wait on a bench for his mother to help him home. He alternated between remorse and working out on the pull-up bar. Pichushkin earned a living and money for booze by working as a general laborer, salesman, and loader at various stores and warehouses. Colleagues avoided Alexander, who was obsessively clean and constantly ran to wash his hands, and in his free time at work he would go to the back room and slash empty cardboard boxes with a knife. Pichushkin didn't have any close friends. He preferred to spend time with his cat and dog. Pichushkin worked at a supermarket until 2006 and had never been married by the age of 32. Pichushkin's hunt began in 2001. He disposed of the bodies in one way, by throwing them into sewer manholes. The missing people were added to the list of the disappeared, and law enforcement wasn't looking for a maniac. Victim selection led to this monstrous negligence. At first, Pichushkin took the lives of social outcasts, alcoholics, those who wouldn't be searched for anyway. However, soon he wanted something new. According to the maniac himself, taking the lives of those you know is especially enjoyable. So, 25. Pichushkin's victim was Maria Vericheva, a resident of Tatarstan. The girl came to Moscow to earn money and met Alexander in 2001. Maria sold various items near the Kakhovskaya metro station, where Pichushkin sought his future victims. That day, Maria was very upset after a fight with her boyfriend. That's when a nice guy, Sasha Pichushkin, approached her. He offered Maria to sell. Some stolen cameras from a factory are hidden in the woods nearby, Pichushkin told the girl. You'll sell most and keep most of the money. Vericheva, 3 months pregnant, foolishly agreed. They entered the woods after dark. Near the well, Pichushkin grabbed her by the hair, hit her several times and pushed her into the well. Maria tried to resist, but the strength was too unequal. The girl slipped and fell to the bottom of the well from a height of about 8 meters. She was carried along the sewer pipes until she got caught on some kind of bracket. After recovering from the shock, the girl searched for a way to the surface, but the hatch was invisible in the darkness. Waist deep in icy water, Vericheva spent the whole night, and when dawn broke, she crawled toward a nearby hatch.
I wasn't able to get out of there. I stood waist deep in that icy water all night. I felt awful. I was in pain. I was scared. I was cold. In the end, I was in so much pain that at that moment I didn't want to live anymore.
People walking in the park heard Maria's screams and rushed to help. The medics at the scene were amazed by the girl's endurance. She survived a night in icy water and even saved her baby. Closer to summer, Maria gave birth to a baby girl. Vericheva did not tell anyone what really happened to her. Maybe she was afraid of revenge or of getting in trouble for not having Moscow registration. She only said that she accidentally fell into a manhole, that she was walking and slipped. Pichushkin, meanwhile, continued to take lives. That was the end of the happy part of Vericheva's rescue story. In 2004, she went to prison for participating in a street group robbery. 3 years later, she was released, stayed in a Red Cross shelter, searched orphanages for her daughter, then went on a drinking binge and ran away. Nothing was heard about her after that. As already mentioned, Pichushkin knew many of his victims personally, those whom he wanted to send. Before killing them, he tried to get to know as well as possible. He took pleasure in asking his future victims about their dreams and plans for life, knowing that they would never come true. One of those who agreed to drink to the memory of Pichushkin's dog in May 2001 was 52-year-old Yevgeny Pronin. That day, he was celebrating with friends his release from the temporary detention center, where he had ended up after stabbing the dentist's girlfriend. Pichushkin spotted Pronin and took him into Bitsevsky Park, where he got him very drunk. After ensuring Pronin could barely stand, Pichushkin led him to a sewer manhole and pushed him in. Yevgeny died, drowning in the sewage water. After coming home, Pichushkin took a sliding puzzle and glued newspaper pieces with numbers 1 and 2 on 2 tiles. For Adichuk and Pronin, the beginning of a long, bloody series had started. The tiles in the sliding puzzle ran out, so Pichushkin switched to a calendar and later to a chessboard. He initially glued numbers on, but later covered the squares with checkers pieces. When he ran out of checkers pieces, the maniac used juice and vodka caps from crime scenes to cover the squares. In the summer of 2001, the fate of Pronin befell another 10 people who carelessly agreed to become Pichushkin's drinking companions. 61-year-old Gennady Safonov, on the last day of his life, escaped from rehab, where he had been placed for compulsory treatment. The retiree was in no hurry to quit substances and alcoholism, so he gladly went to have a drink with Alexander in Bitsevsky Park. If he hadn't escaped, he'd still be alive and maybe wouldn't have drunk, though even now he doesn't drink, recalled Pichushkin about the crime. After meeting Safonov, he rushed home, expecting to arrive by 8:30 post-meridium. His favorite television series was starting then. Demon Sorrow, late July 2001. Pichushkin brought his 11th victim, 22-year-old Andrei Konovaltsev, to the collector. However, when Pichushkin tried to push the young man into the open manhole, he raised an alarm. 2 women passing by heard the call for help and started screaming, but the maniac managed to push Konovaltsev down and escaped. The doctors couldn't save Andrei, but police surveillance was set up near the manhole. When he learned this, Pichushkin decided to lay low. He resumed his hunt only in January 2002. Alexander decided to change his tactics. Instead of the park, he lured his victim to the 16th floor of a high-rise building. An improvised feast unfolded right on the stair landing. When his new acquaintance got drunk, Pichushkin led him out onto the balcony and pushed him off.
I lifted him up, laid him on the railing, then knocked his legs out and he fell down. Then there was a wild scream down there. Well, that's it. I went down the stairs.
The maniac got no satisfaction from the crime. He didn't like the victim's dying screams at all, so Alexander decided to return to Bitsevsky Park. On March 8 that year, Pichushkin marked the day with another killing. After congratulating his mother and sister, he went to the park, where 42-year-old disabled man Alexei Fedorov awaited him. After getting the man drunk to the point of unconsciousness, the maniac took his life and threw him into a sewer manhole. Fedorov's mother and brother searched for him, showing his photo in nearby courtyards. One of the people they questioned about Alexei was Pichushkin himself. Mikhail Lobov, 13, miraculously survived his encounter with the maniac. The boy lost his parents at an early age and was raised in an orphanage from which he often ran away. During one of these escapes, on March 10, 2002, he met Pichushkin, who offered the teenager 500 rubles to help carry a television and a printer out of Bitsevsky Park. Thus, Lobov ended up at the bottom of a sewer manhole, but luck was on his side. After struggling in the filth, he managed to grab onto a bracket on the wall of the well and climb out. Pichushkin realized his mistake a few days later when he saw Lobov on the street. The maniac didn't dare attack the teenager again, but decided that before throwing people into the well, he would take their lives. He bought a rare item, a pen gun, from a colleague at the pharmaceutical warehouse. He decided to test it on 43-year-old German Chervyakov, a former violinist who had lost his job and home due to alcohol problems. That's why he built himself a hut in Bitsevsky Park. Early in the morning in August 2002, the maniac broke into Chervyakov's dwelling and shot him in the head. The owner of the hut died on the spot.
However, in the next attack,
he became fascinated with his weapon. He shot 42-year-old Sergei Fedorov in the head twice, but he survived. While reloading the handle, Pichushkin almost took his own life, as an accidentally fired bullet passed right by his forehead. Then the enraged maniac finished off Fedorov with a crowbar, which he used to open manholes, and threw the handle into a nearby pond. It just makes noise and is useless. Yes, it was shot.
It seemed to them and to him as if someone had hit him. Then he realized he was wiping blood from the back of his head. No reaction, not even unconsciousness. He twisted his arms awkwardly, unable to hold his skull. It nearly slipped off. It was wild.
Pichushkin killed people with a hammer he carefully selected in a store, choosing one that would make attacking his victims easier. Killing people isn't like hammering nails. You need to choose a reliable tool so it doesn't let you down, the criminal said during the investigation. After the metal part of the hammer came off the wooden handle while taking the life of 36-year-old Oleg Lavrenkov, Pichushkin decided to use only serenolite tools. For all the crimes where he sent people to the other world with a hammer, Pichushkin committed them wearing construction gloves. Afterwards, he washed the hammer in the nearest stream and immediately washed his bloodied clothes at home. In 2002, the maniac killed 14. In the fall and winter, crimes in Bitsevsky Park became more frequent. Pichushkin didn't hide the bodies, he left them out in the open. The first victim whom he didn't throw into the sewer in September 2001 was a 46-year-old lawyer, Sergei Kuznetsov. The maniac planned to kill him with a hammer but got drunk and fell asleep while talking to Pichushkin. Then he covered Kuznetsov's mouth and nose, waiting for him to suffocate to death. Yuri was dismissed as an accident. A month later, Pichushkin attacked 31-year-old homeless man Nikolai Vorobyev. After several blows to the head with a hammer, he tried to escape from the attacker and ran, but Pichushkin kept up, delivering more and more blows. Vorobyev. There were only a few meters left to the busy street where people were when he received the final fatal blow. All the bodies had the signature mark, a fractured skull and a branch or a bottle inserted into the wound. There were articles in the press about a maniac who brutally took the lives of elderly men. Before 2005, no one suspected a maniac was active in the Bitsevsky forest. Zuzino residents believed Chechens were abducting people for slavery. Elsewhere, the water swept them to the Kuryanovskoye treatment facility, where many remained unidentified. Pichushkin specialized in down-and-out alcoholics, many of whom had neither family nor friends. At the same time, alarming signals were coming from the Kuryanovskoye treatment facility, where 29 bodies eventually washed up. About each terrifying discovery. Kuryanovo specialists reported every terrifying discovery to police but got no response. The deaths of people were written off as accidents, and some remained completely unidentified. Before Pichushkin was arrested, the survivors Verichev and Lobov tried to tell the police about the circumstances of the attack, but no one took their words seriously. Relatives and friends of the victims saw their loved ones in the company of Pichushkin and reported this to the police, but for some reason this information was also ignored. They also showed no reaction to the report from an elderly man who accidentally ran into Pichushkin while walking his dogs. He approached him and offered him a drink. The Muscovite refused, but Pichushkin became angry and insisted. The criminal fled when two dogs suddenly ran to their owner. Seeing the dogs, Alexander disappeared, and the dog owner hurried to the police. After listening to the complainant, the police officers considered his story a product of an overactive imagination and politely showed him the door. News of a maniac in Bitsevsky Park only spread after the homeless man Vorobyev's body was found. Soon after that, 73-year-old Vladimir Dudukin was found dead. Pichushkin killed him in November 2005. After hitting his head 5 times with a hammer, the killer inserted a stick into the wound, then replaced it with an empty vodka bottle. After that, disfigured bodies began to be found in Bitsevsky Park with alarming frequency. The maniac's appetite was growing. The intervals between the crimes were getting shorter every year. Some of the bodies were missing parts, and the men were missing their heads. Later, however, it turned out that stray dogs had bitten it off. Only in November-December 2005, Pichushkin took the lives of 7 people, and in total that year he killed 10 victims. By then, everyone in Moscow knew a serial killer was active in the capital. People called him the Bitsevsky maniac. He enjoyed listening to the latest news about himself, both in his own family and at work. Pichushkin was pleased with his terrible fame. Moscow police deployed all forces to the investigation, with operatives maintaining constant duty in Bitsevsky Park. Realizing that the maniac mainly looked for victims among local drinkers, the police placed their own officers into neighborhood groups. They pretended to be drunks, hoping that sooner or later the criminal would take the bait. But Pichushkin sensed something was wrong and went into hiding for a couple of months. Raids in Bitsevsky Park continued. In February 2006, journalists tried to check the documents of a passerby. Instead of showing his passport, he tried to run away. The officers opened fire on him, wounding his thigh. When they searched the suspect, they found a knife in his pocket. The detainee said his odd behavior was because he thought they wanted to rob him. It took very little time to determine that the detainee was not involved in the crimes in the park. A month later, plainclothes officers noticed a strange woman and decided to check her documents. But when she saw the men approaching her, she also started to run away. The police officers caught up with her, and it turned out that it wasn't a woman, but a man dressed as a woman. In the strange person's bag, the officers found a hammer. It turned out the detainee wasn't connected to the serial killer and was actually afraid of the Bitsevsky maniac, mistaking an officer for him. The man who wore women's clothes carried the hammer for self-defense. Then Pichushkin read a false story in one of the newspapers, claiming that the Bitsevsky maniac had been caught. So vain. Alexander became furious and quickly resumed his crimes. One of the maniac's last victims in March 2006 was his co-worker at the supermarket, 25-year-old Mahmoud Joldashev. By the way, by this time Pichushkin had undergone surgery on his hand and could no longer work as a loader. He switched to working in the sales area, where he arranged Joldashev's products on the shelves. He had nowhere to spend the night, and Pichushkin suggested going to his place and having a little drink on the way. In Bitsevsky Park, the maniac killed his colleague with a hammer and hid the body just in case. He knew that if the police found it, they would inspect the store. Pichushkin took the life of 48-year-old Larissa Kulagina in April, and in June 2006 he went out on another hunt, which turned out to be his last. The maniac's last victim was his 36-year-old colleague Marina Moskaleva. The maniac worked as a loader in a store. Alexander invited Marina on a date and even considered sparing her if the girl, who started to get nervous during the walk, decided to leave. But Moskaleva didn't run away, thereby signing her own death sentence. Alexander was found because the woman's phone broke the day before, so she gave her suitor's number to her son to keep in touch. In the park, Pichushkin was in for a surprise. Following police orders, all the wells where he could have dumped a body had been filled with concrete. The investigators came for Pichushkin the day after his last crime, after he had taken Moskaleva's life. Her son gave him a note with his phone number on it. Moreover, the cameras installed in the Moscow metro recorded Marina on the day of her death, walking through the lobby in the company of Alexander. In the maniac's apartment, they found a chessboard with the 61st square covered, corresponding to the number of victims, as well as a hammer, fragments of the handle of which were found in the wounds of some victims. At first, Pichushkin denied committing the crimes. He only started talking a few days later, and before that he asked for a glass of vodka, which he drank in one gulp before launching into stories about his misdeeds.
Actually, they called me the Bezovsky maniac. That's me.
Though charged with 52 crimes, 49 murders and 3 attempted murders, the maniac tried to tell investigators he killed 63 people. He recalled the crimes with cynicism and without much emotion. Life is the most precious thing a person has. Money, Mercedes cars, mansions, they don't even come close. I took the most precious thing, and I didn't bother with small things. Some died heroically, some died cowardly. Before death, they called me the devil, cursed me in God's name, some said their goodbyes. Pichushkin explained that he took lives in order to live because the killings gave him surges of inspiration. He went to crime scene reenactments with obvious pleasure. He enjoyed hitting mannequins with a wooden hammer as hard as he could, recalling the details of his crimes. The only thing the maniac demanded was to buy him new shoes for the trips, so he wouldn't get his own dirty in the mud. The court sentenced Pichushkin in October 2007 to life imprisonment combined with compulsory psychiatric treatment. The maniac was unhappy with the court's verdict and appealed, asking for the sentence to be reduced to 25 years. However, his request was denied, and soon the criminal was transferred to the special regime colony Polar Owl, located in the now well-known settlement of Karp in the Yamalo-Nenets Autonomous Okrug. At first, Pichushkin was placed together with the Chechen terrorist Nurpasha Kulayev, who took part in the school siege in Beslan in 2004. But soon the militant requested to be transferred to another cell, as Pichushkin tormented him with his terrifying confessions and threatened to take his life. Eventually, other cellmates of the maniac also made the same request to the colony administration. As a result, Pichushkin was moved to a separate cell, from which he is still often transferred to solitary confinement for insulting the guards. Despite the fact that right after his arrest, Pichushkin's mother burned all his photos and personal belongings, she did not abandon her son and started writing him letters and sending him packages.
It's hard. Maybe it's hard to admit, of course. Subtitles by Dima Torzok. Subtitles created by Dima Torzok.
The maniac at the Polar Owl tried to build a personal life. He corresponded with a woman from Khanty-Mansiysk named Natalia and wanted to marry her, but the wedding never happened. The maniac still regrets his crimes, but doesn't feel any remorse. He considers himself a kind person. On the plus side, I'm very punctual. And the minuses, what minuses? Well, maybe I'm too kind. That's in your value system. You say I'm evil, but actually, you're the ones who are evil. At the same time, if he ever gets out, Pechushkin plans to immediately kill a couple of people, assault a woman, and drink vodka. I'll come back to Bitsevsky Park. My hand remembers the hammer well. The name Andrei Chikatilo is familiar to anyone interested in the criminal history of the Soviet Union. Even 30 years after his death, he remains the most notorious maniac in the post-Soviet space. And while screenwriters and writers are inspired by his persona to write thrillers and detective stories, other criminals see Chikatilo as their idol and dream of surpassing him. 25 years of criminal activity, 80 victims, 11 wrongfully convicted people, one of whom was sentenced to execution. This is the brief biography of Sergei Tkash, the Pavlograd and Pologovsky maniac who called himself a beast in human form. Text by Black Moose exclusively for the Strashnota channel. Sergei Tkash was born in the city of Kiselevsky, Kemerovo region in 1952. Being the fourth child in a miner's family, the boy hardly ever received affection and was not attached to his parents. His father often drank after work and, when drunk, frequently beat his wife and children. He did this even when he was sober, for the slightest fault, for disobedience, or for being slow. Sergei grew up as a sickly and weak boy, and he got beaten for that as well. This is exactly what motivated Sergei to take up weightlifting. Sergei trained hard and even became the junior champion of his hometown, but he got injured and was forced to give up his dreams of sports. He took the shattering of his hopes hard, but it was only the first in his life. After school, Sergei Tkash joined the army and served in the navy on the Laptov Sea, working on aerial photography. The young man enjoyed his naval service and chose to dedicate his life to it, but it didn't work out as before. During the medical examination, Tkach was found to have a heart condition. He was able to complete his mandatory service. Here, his health was sufficient, but he had to forget about a career as a sailor. Tkach's sense of injustice and resentment was so deep that he attempted to take his own life. The doctors managed to save the young man, but his military service was over as well. The unstable young man was sent ashore. Tkach spent time in Texas, where he had served. It was hard to return to his parents. It was frightening. His father would surely mock him, beat him, and say that he never expected anything good from a son like him. For several days, Tkach drank heavily, but alcohol only dulled the pain. He had to think about how to go on living. To earn some money there in Texas, Sergei Tkach got a job with the dog catching service. The service was engaged in shooting stray animals whose skins were then sold to a furrier. According to Tkach himself, his co-workers were somewhat disturbed by the fact that he used a knife to kill the dogs, not a gun. But he did his job well, so they put up with this oddity. He came home 18 months later and started working at the police station. Sergei Tkach soon attended the Novosibirsk Special Police School of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and worked as a forensic expert at the Kemerovo District Police Department. Capable, intelligent. After 6 months, Tkach earned a promotion and a raise. It seemed that the road to the top was open for the young specialist, but in 1979 he was caught falsifying the results of an examination and was fired. Having lost the opportunity to continue his studies at the university and to join the party, Tkach once again felt that his future life had no meaning. He started drinking again, and now alcohol only fueled the smoldering anger inside him, which he took out on his family. By that time, Tkach was married to Natalia Stavba and had 2 small children. Shortly after he was fired, the marriage fell apart. Alcohol also played a role in his dismissal. Arguments in the Tkach family became constant. The spouses did not get along, and Natalia threatened with divorce. Separation was only a matter of time. As Tkach himself told journalists, one day when he returned home, he found a half-naked man in his one-room apartment. Tkach threw the lover down the stairs, then packed his things and one of his son's things and went to Crimea. A couple of years earlier, his parents had moved there. A few days later, Natalia Tkach showed up there as well, demanding that he give her the child. He wasn't going to give her back her son, and he wasn't going to return to Kiselevsk himself, which he told her. Then Natalia resorted to trickery. She pretended to agree to leave the child with his father and asked for only one thing, to bring him to the Simferopol airport so she could say goodbye to him there. At the airport, Tkach was met by police, while Natalia and the child flew to Kiselevsk, and Tkach spent 3 days in airport detention. Once he got out, he immediately got drunk. Going out for a walk to clear his mind and deal with the feeling of injustice and resentment, Tkach noticed an attractive young woman walking alone toward the park. Not thinking about anything like that yet, he followed her. When there were no passers-by around, he attacked the girl from behind and gripped her neck tightly with his strong fingers. Dragging the victim into the park, Tkach waited until she stopped struggling, then pinned her down and assaulted her. At that moment, he said he didn't fully understand his actions, as if his mind was in a thick fog. When it cleared, the criminal realized that he had taken a person's life. Still shocked by what happened, Tkach went to the nearest payphone and called the local police. "I've committed a crime," he said, revealing where he left the body. However, the officer on duty who took the call didn't believe such a straightforward confession, so Tkach hung up the phone. Soon after, he committed several more similar crimes. Between 1980 and 1982, he killed 5 girls and young women. In 1983, the future maniac decided to move to the city of Pavlograd in the Dnipropetrovsk region, especially since he had just met a beautiful girl from this city and a romance had started between them. Soon after moving, Tkach proposed to his chosen one, and not long after, the couple had a daughter. Family life in the new marriage was calmer, but not without scandals. Sergei still couldn't find a steady job. His wife worked at a factory and earned more, and this depressed him. He was also tormented by the returning urges to squeeze someone's neck and press until the victim stopped struggling. It kept getting stronger until finally Tkach gave into it. Soon a real trail of victims was following him. As victims, Sergei mostly chose girls and young women between the ages of 8 and 20. According to the maniac, there was no deliberate selection. He targeted whoever he came across, as he stated in an interview. Tkach called his crimes games with Satan and referred to himself as a beast with nothing human inside. Subtitles. The maniac chose his victims at random, simply walking along the railroad or the highway. The area was wooded, and it was extremely easy to ambush a defenseless child or teenager in a forest belt and later drag the body there as well. As a rule, Tkach attacked from behind, using his physical strength and leaving the victim no chance to scream. He would wrap his arms or a rope around the victim's neck to kill them, then commit abuse. Tkach often took jewelry, a purse, underwear, or cosmetics as crime mementos. According to Sergei, throughout his entire life he never once had a single nightmare about the victims. What happened was immediately erased from his mind. Almost all of Tkach's crimes were committed while he was intoxicated. A glass of vodka was a normal dose for him. Tkach could easily drink a whole bottle on a dare and even bragged about it among his drinking buddies, organizing competitions to see who could drink faster. According to Tkach, he always won. Sergei, familiar with criminalist's work, knew its strengths and weaknesses. To avoid leaving traces, he wore work gloves on his hands and used a condom during sexual contact. He left the crime scene walking along the railroad ties, attempting to hide his tracks or cover them with leaves. Sometimes he even returned to the crime scene with investigators, acted as an attesting witness, checked himself to see if he had left any evidence or if there were any clues. But no clues were found for almost 25 years. In Pavlograd, where more than 100,000 people lived at that time, it was quite easy for Tkach to disappear. The unsuspecting neighbors gossiped with him, the local drunks had a drink with him at the end of the day, and calmly watched as neighbor Seryoga got on his bicycle and went about his business. No one suspected these errands were actually his search for the next victim. In November 1984, 10-year-old Olya Dmitrienko's body was found at an abandoned oil factory in Pavlograd. The girl was strangled with a rope and then assaulted. Tkach took her music notebook and her watch. On February 13th, 1985, Olya Shuvalova's mother, Nadezhda, came to school for her 8-year-old daughter. Pavlograd was still shaken by the death of Olya Dmitrienko. Many parents were leaving work early on purpose to pick up their children from school and literally walk them home by the hand. Nadezhda came to the school a little early, before the lesson was over. Deciding that she would come back in 10 minutes, she stepped away, and when she returned, she found out that Olya had already gone home by herself. I came back.
The teacher told me, I dressed your child and she already went home. It's 50 meters away.
Nadezhda ran after her, but the child was already gone. The girl was not in the apartment where her husband, just back from the night shift, slept. The woman hurried through the apartment, rushed outside, and noticed children's footprints at the entrance. Maybe it was Olya, I'm not sure.
The snow under the windows was untouched, and she once showed me saying, Mom, look, I'm coming home from school, and my backpack is coming home from school, and I leave little footprints like this with my backpack in the snow. And I saw similar footprints.
Nadezhda called for her daughter. Neighbors looked out worried, and I woke up and left the apartment. My husband, my daughter is missing, my little girl is missing, the woman kept repeating. Everyone in the building started looking for Olya. The girl's body was found in the basement. Her mother said it was still warm, almost alive. A man's handprint was visible on her face. Olya, like the others, died from neck compression. When the girl stopped breathing, the maniac abused her. The body of a 20-year-old girl with the same signs of violent death was found in the local river in the spring, Pavlograd. I stopped sleeping peacefully. One crime after another followed. One after another, girls and teenage girls died at the hands of a serial maniac. Women, driven mad by fear, wrote an open letter to the newspaper Pravda, where they told that a maniac was operating in their city. The women begged to protect them and their children from the monster who was roaming the area with impunity. Amid public outcry, both authorities and Pavlograd residents pressured local investigators. Children and young girls are dying, but police do nothing. It was urgent to demonstrate at least some kind of result. At that time, to show results, innocent people began being sent to jail. The first was Igor Ryzhkov. Each of Tkach's crimes in Pavlograd was investigated the same way. All local men matching the suspect's description were questioned, especially those with prior convictions, mainly for sex-related crimes. The survivors, often children, were in shock. Even after recovering, many could not remember the perpetrator's face or provide a description. This significantly complicated the investigation. Igor Ryzhkov turned out to be one of the men questioned in the attempted assault case. That time, the girl managed to escape. He fit the general description, but that was enough. According to Ryzhkov, they started having heart-to-heart talks with him. The investigators pressured him to confess because they had many cases to handle. They promised to charge him with hooliganism if he confessed. It was only about an attempted assault, and the victim got away with just a minor fright. He'll sign the documents, serve 15 days, and walk free with a clear conscience, the officers assured him. Ryzhkov agreed, but once at the station, it turned out that they were ready to pin several charges on the man at once, including assault. After the confrontation, where the victim identified Ryzhkov, his fate was sealed. Despite the lack of evidence and numerous violations during the investigation, the man was sentenced to the highest punishment, death penalty. He was charged with 2 deaths, 3 cases of abuse, and several attempted assaults. These were all the known crimes of the Pavlograd maniac. Ryzhkov felt his world collapse. In court, he desperately tried to prove his innocence, but the system had sentenced him even before the trial began. He was sent to death row. Only in May 1988 did the plenum of the Supreme Court of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics finally overturn Igor Ryzhkov's sentence on several counts. The case was sent for further investigation. The final sentence was 10 years in a high-security colony, 10 years for crimes he did not commit. Around the same time as Ryzhkov, Alexander Chudnik and Valery Koshun were imprisoned. Chudnik served 10 years for crimes he didn't commit, Koshun 15. A short time after his release, Valery Korshun died from illnesses he contracted in prison. But back then, Pavlograd was solemnly told the criminal has been caught. Igor Ryzhkov will pay for his crime. But in that same year, 1987, Tkach caught 11-year-old Valia Osinina from Varvarovka. After abusing the unconscious girl, he left her in the forest, thinking she was dead, but Valia regained consciousness and made it home. The girl remembered her attacker's appearance, and investigators started a composite sketch. The next victim of Tkach was a 17-year-old girl. Death, abuse, the method was the same. But Ryzhkov was already in pre-trial detention, so who was committing the crimes? The investigation answered this easily. 2 maniacs are active in the city, with one intentionally copying the other's methods. The people of Pavlograd couldn't believe 2 maniacs would use identical methods in the same city. That can't be. This time, the mothers of Pavlograd wrote a letter to Gorbachev, who was then the first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. In response, an order was sent down to the Pavlograd Criminal Investigation Department to find and detain the criminal within 10 days. When there were no results after the allotted time, a wave of dismissals swept through the department. Some employees were removed from their positions. A team of investigators from the capital was sent to Pavlograd to show how things should be done and finally solve the case. But the investigators from the capital failed as well, and they returned to Moscow. Sergei Tkach had every reason to be proud of himself. He managed to outsmart the entire Soviet investigative system, which had once been so unfair to him. While hundreds of agents from the capital scoured the city, he calmly kept committing crimes. As Tkach grew more confident in evading capture, he struck more often, sometimes right under investigators' noses.
In one forest plantation, a group of police officers was on duty with a radio. Then they left for lunch. They were gone for about an hour or two. When they came back, another crime had been committed at that spot.
He was detained several times for suspicion of the crime, but Tkach always managed to bribe his way out. He said, "I was repeatedly interrogated by regional prosecutor's office staff and police captains as well. Maybe now they walk these halls with the rank of colonel. Should they be ashamed now? So, I was detained on suspicion of those crimes, but I would present and build such a version of events that they would release me right away. Then I would isolate myself, drink at night, talk to my dog, and do it again." In 1988, the body of Oksana Nevchuk was found in a forest plantation. One of the passers-by noticed a man on a bicycle nearby but couldn't describe him. In that same summer of 1988, Tkach killed a 9-year-old girl and assaulted a 12-year-old, and by the spring of the following year he added 2 more 15-year-old girls to his list. In July 1989, 8-year-old Olya Svetlichnaya rode her bike to the store and never came back. The worried parents immediately rushed to the police. That evening, the girl's body was found in a forested area not far from her home. There were rope marks on her neck, and she had been assaulted. Someone again noticed a person nearby on a bicycle. Surely that was the maniac. Olya's mother, Lyudmila, grieved quietly, while her father, Vladimir, loudly blamed the police. Knowing the maniac would likely return to the crime scene, he walked around the nearby grove. One day, Vladimir noticed a man on a bicycle and ran after him, but couldn't catch up. Svetlikny swore that he would find the criminal himself, since the police couldn't do it. However, he soon came under suspicion himself, and surveillance was organized on him. But Lyudmila, Vladimir's wife, started to be pressured. They began telling her about how cruelly the maniac abused the girl, telling her about the victims and showing her photographs. According to Lyudmila, she was gradually led to believe that the criminal could be her husband. Lyudmila began to suspect and fear her husband. Soon she was almost ready to turn him in to the police. The topic:
Svetliknaya, to be honest, I have kept it secret. I don't want to lie to you. Subtitles by Dima Torzok. Subtitles by Dima Torzok. If you ask me something, I'll tell you a little lie. I'm telling the truth. I know the truth of the first step. Investigation. The Svetlichnaya case. This is, 4th level clearance, which means it's a top secret matter.
One of the surviving victims of the maniac remembered the scent of his cologne, tête-à-tête. The Svetlichny family home was searched and a bottle of cologne was found, a starter pistol modified to fire live rounds, and a knife with a rope. Svetlichny was arrested. Torture, threats, and the realization that justice would not help broke the man. In the pre-trial detention cell, he took his own life. He hanged himself. Some people were sure that Svetlichny took his own life precisely because he couldn't bear the weight of his guilt. People upset came to the Svetlichny family's house and tried several times to set it on fire. The public condemnation was so strong that Lyudmila Svetlichnaya had to quit her job. For many years, she couldn't sleep peacefully.
Lyudmila told us they became outcasts in Pavlograd. The deceased children's relatives repeatedly set the house on fire, leading to Svetlichnaya's dismissal.
The wife of such a murderer is teaching our children. Goodbye, friend. Well, goodbye. And after that, I didn't work for 10 years.
Unaware of or indifferent to the tragedy, Tkach kept doing evil. In 1990, he added 3 more victims to his list. In 1993, another 4, and in 1995, another 3. Mostly the maniac operated in Pavlograd, but in 1995 he committed 1 crime in the Kharkiv region. After drinking vodka, Tkach walked along Topolinaya alley by the cemetery and saw a girl. He grabbed the child's neck, almost automatically. Between 1996 and 2000, Tkach claimed another 12 victims. In 2000, his wife became director of a factory in Pology, Zaporizhzhia region. The family moved there, and the Pavlograd maniac became the Pology maniac. In 2002, Tkach killed 9-year-old Jana Popovich, but her death was blamed on her 4-year-old relative Yakov Popovich. The boy lived near the place where the body was found. That was enough to press charges. The teenager was taken from his school class to the police. Investigators pressured him, "Confess or it will get worse." In the end, Yakov wrote a confession and ended up behind bars. First in a juvenile prison, then in an adult facility. In 2005, Sergei Tkach confessed that he was the one who killed Jana Popovich. However, Yakov Popovich remained in prison and was only released in 2011 after spending more than 8 years behind bars. None of the investigators involved in his case were punished. In 2003, Tkach assaulted Irina Bodrova and later took the life of 15-year-old Valia Skuratova. Soon after, another 13-year-old girl, Olya Prishchepa, died. Vitaly Kaira was arrested on suspicion of attacking Olya. The 23-year-old guy was seen near the place where the body was found.
Vospit rose up faithfully. They put the handcuffs behind in the corner neatly and then started beating.
After handcuffing Kairu to the radiator, the officers started beating a confession out of him. When that didn't work, they threatened him. "If you don't confess, something will happen to your daughter or your wife." Kairu only agreed then and was sent to prison in 2004. Already in 2005, Tkach himself confessed to this crime, and his DNA matched the DNA found under Oli Prishchepa's fingernails. But it took another 3 years before Vitaly Kaira was released. The investigators who forced his confession were sentenced to 5 years in prison with a 3-year probation period. They never spent a day in jail because they were granted amnesty.
To this day, that mindset remains, that you don't need friends at all, you can't trust anyone because they'll turn on you right away.
One of Tkach's next victims survived, but she couldn't really say anything except that a man attacked her. The investigators went through the list of suspects again, and this time they focused on Nikolai Demchuk, who knew Tkach well and worked with him on the collective farm. The 20-year-old was treated as usual, beaten, threatened, and beaten again. Demchuk also signed a confession and went to prison. He served his sentence in the same prison as Kaira and was released in 2008 despite Tkach confessing to the incident in 2005. In 2004, 13-year-old Vita Kretina suffered at the hands of Tkach. A maniac ambushed the girl in a forest plantation, pinned her down and pulled down her underwear, but fled when a woman passed nearby. Vita regained consciousness and ran home. She told investigators that the attacker was a fair-haired man with a bicycle and no mustache. By that time, 3 people were already in prison, unjustly convicted for Tkacha's crime. Another convict had been executed and another was sent for compulsory treatment in a psychiatric hospital. The crimes continued, but this didn't seem to bother the prosecutors at all. One of them, who sent Nikolai Demchuk behind bars, would later even say, "There are uranium mines all around. The city is full of people with disorders. Everyone who was sent behind bars is a maniac." In 2005, another innocent man, Maxim Dmitrenko, was convicted for Tkacha's crime. He also wrote a confession and was sentenced by the court to 13 years. Maxim was released from prison only in 2011 after Ukrainian media started demanding it. Then, the president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, took up his case, but imprisonment undermined Dmitrenko's health and broke him psychologically. During this time, his house was destroyed, his family turned away from him. In 2015, Maxim Dmitrenko died. He wasn't even 40. In July 2005, 18-year-old Olha Topalova became the next survivor. She remembered what the attacker looked like, blonde, with a mustache, and he arrived on a bicycle.
I fought all the way home, I was holding onto my head, I had a bicycle, and I remember I couldn't breathe, and then I woke up over there, and my swim trunks were over my eyes and my shirt was all torn.
It turned out I checked the pulse on my wrists. There was no pulse on either wrist. I checked the pulse on my neck. There was none there either. Olya was unconscious for just over 3 hours. Or maybe it was clinical death, I don't know.
A composite sketch was created from her description and Tkach became a suspect. However, during interrogations he committed 3 more crimes. His last victim was neighbor Katya Karugia's daughter. The 9-year-old girl was sunbathing on the riverbank with her friends. That's where Tkach noticed her. He knew her parents well and even came to her funeral. Along with everyone else, Tkach lamented how inhumanely the maniac had treated her. But someone noticed Tkach himself, and they remembered seeing him with Katya and other girls by the river.
He was swimming with the girls from the coach. I thought they were his granddaughters, but they weren't.
The man generally matched the description compiled from the victim's memories. Operatives visited Sergei's house and heard a phrase that many Russian-language media would later repeat: "I have been waiting for you for 25 years. When he was arrested, the criminal did not resist and willingly walked to the car. They didn't even put handcuffs on him. Tkach confessed to everything almost immediately. He drew a map of the area marking the places where he committed the crimes. Later, jewelry, watches, lipstick and other belongings of the victims were found in his house. Tkach openly said that he committed the crimes to prove that the investigation was powerless against the criminal. In his final statement, he asked the court to be objective. But not only towards him, but also towards the employees of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the prosecutor's office and the investigators. All of them, he said, were willing accomplices in his crimes. Forensic experts, operatives, investigators, all of them are ready to turn a blind eye to the evidence and put innocent people behind bars. The cases of Popovich, Dmitrienko, Kaira and other wrongfully convicted people prove this. Tkach confessed to one crime after another, and soon the number exceeded 30. The maniac took responsibility for much more. He claimed that he had killed between 80 and 100 girls. But some cases, due to the passage of time, were simply impossible to solve anymore. For many episodes of people disappearing in the 80s, criminal cases weren't even opened. For example, Tkach said that he buried the body of one of his victims in the yard of an abandoned house. At that time, a case wasn't opened regarding the child's disappearance, but several years later, when the house was bought, the girl's remains were found and identified. The case still wasn't open then because they couldn't determine the cause of death. The girl found in the heating pipeline well in Pavlograd suffered the same fate. They chose not to open a case, concluding the girl may have fallen into the well on her own. Tkach, however, claimed that this was his doing. Some of the survivors might simply not have gone to the police. Abuse causes severe psychological trauma that both the child and parents want to forget quickly. In addition, families might have been afraid of public condemnation. Besides Polohy and Pavlohrad, Tkach operated in Simferopol, Dnipro and the Kharkiv region. Some of his victims may still be listed as missing. In detention, Serhiy Tkach followed news about himself, reading newspapers and watching television to see public opinion. And he was upset when he saw that, in his opinion, he didn't get the fame he deserved because he had even more victims than Chikatilo. Tkach really wanted a movie to be made about him, and he was ready to sell his memoirs to Hollywood, but nobody was interested in them. The forensic psychiatric examination confirmed Tkach's sanity. His psychological profile was typical for a maniac. Emotional coldness, inability to feel compassion, pronounced egocentrism. At the same time, Tkach was vindictive, irritable, and aggressive. Sergei Tkach was convicted in 2008. Initially, he was charged with 36 deaths and attempted murders and was sentenced to life imprisonment. 10 more cases were added to the criminal record of the maniac, and he was given a life sentence for the second time. Sergei Tkach's former wives and children did not visit him. However, unexpectedly in 2014 a young woman named Elena Bulkina contacted him. It turned out she saw him on television and became interested. Tkach and Elena corresponded for about half a year, and in October 2015 she came to visit him. Elena was 38 years younger than Sergei, but she claimed that she fell in love with him despite the age difference in his past. However, it was later found she had also contacted other inmates serving life sentences. Tkach was not the only candidate. The meeting took place in the presence of a guard, separated by glass. It was then that Tkach proposed to Elena, and she agreed. Later, Elena said, "Before the meeting, the chief invited me to talk. I basically knew what he was going to say, but honestly, the direction the conversation took was quite unexpected. I was suddenly asked, 'Do you have any living relatives?' I replied, 'Some are alive and some have passed. Why do you ask?' They actually had their own theory about why I married a prisoner. Maybe someone close to me suffered at his hands, and I want to take revenge." Yelena married Sergei Tkach and got pregnant on their second visit. She gave birth to a daughter, Yelizaveta, in 2016. Sergei Tkach was then 64 years old. In his final 2017 interview with a Ukrainian YouTube channel, Sergei Tkach said he dreamed of visiting Lake Baikal with his wife to enjoy the nature.
The Lena station is where the forest road is kept, as they say, Lake Baikal, to leave and live for your own pleasure, to raise a child.
I want the girls of the younger generation to have grandchildren as much as they can have.
Twins. He died on November 4, 2018 in the colony. Neither his wife nor relatives claimed the body. The maniac who dreamed of surpassing Chikatilo was buried by the prison staff. Henry Howard Holmes was nicknamed the Doctor of Torture. He is considered the first registered serial maniac in America. The story of his crimes is full of terrifying cruelty and mysteries that still frighten people to this day, and his hotel became the most frightening place in the United States of America. Henry Holmes is believed to have had between 27 and 350 victims according to various estimates. No one will ever know the truth, and no one ever will. He was smart enough to carry out his disgusting schemes for many years. This story began in the United States at the end of the 19th century. The terrifying maniac was born in New Hampshire on May 16, 1861. Herman Webster Mudgett, that was his name, was actually raised by a strict and abusive father. The boy was subjected not only to physical but also psychological abuse, which made him withdrawn and insecure. It wasn't any better at school. His peers teased him and mocked him in every possible way. One day, some older students, having learned about Herman's fear of the dead, decided to teach the know-it-all a lesson. They dragged him into the medical room, pressed his face to a skull, and forced him to touch the bones. This experience didn't scare the boy. On the contrary, it sparked his interest in the structure of the human body. He later said that it was after this incident that he wanted to dedicate his life to medicine. It was a cruel and risky act toward a child my age. In 1872 there was a fire that destroyed 30% of Chicago. The 11-year-old boy liked to imagine his parents burning alive in that fire, and he began experimenting on animals with fire, knives, ropes, and chemicals. Studying came easily to Herman Mudgett. After graduating from college, he entered the University of Michigan in 1884, but he was interested in more than just knowledge there. Starting from his first year, Hermann staged accidents, taking out insurance policies in advance on deceased people to collect payouts, and also stole corpses from the university laboratory. The sight of a dead body no longer scared him. On the contrary, Hermann most enjoyed dissecting bodies during anatomy classes. In 1886, Hermann Webster Maggett decided to change his name. Now he was Henry Howard Holmes. He thought this pseudonym sounded more respectable. After graduating, Henry moved to Chicago and settled in Englewood. Soon he met Dr. Holton, who was suffering from cancer and owned a pharmacy. Holmes quickly got a job there as a pharmacist, where he proved himself very well. The owner of the pharmacy passed away soon after hiring the new employee. Seizing the opportunity to take over the business, Holmes convinced the doctor's wife that she would not be able to run the family business. After her husband's death, Henry bought the pharmacy from her for next to nothing and turned it into a profitable business, after which the widow disappeared without a trace. That is how Henry became the owner of the pharmacy, and his business flourished. The young man had a truly vivid imagination and, during his short life, came up with plenty of schemes to remain successful. In the newspaper, Henry Holmes placed an ad for the sale of miraculous water that supposedly had healing properties, and he sold it at a very high price. In reality, there was nothing healing about this water, but it wasn't harmful or dangerous either. It was simply useless. Henry Holmes added vanillin and other extracts to the water to make it smell convincing. A few years later, he got married for the first time to his longtime acquaintance Clara. He treated her cruelly, regularly beating and insulting her. His wife couldn't stand her husband and soon ran away, but the marriage was never officially dissolved. Henry Holmes married again, this time to a woman named Myrta. He didn't change. He insulted and beat his wife again, but the second marriage lasted longer than the previous one. 2 years later, the young couple had a daughter named Lucy, and the family decided to move to a wealthy neighborhood in Chicago where Henry bought property. His wife ran away with their daughter, making Holmes a bachelor again, once more without officially filing for divorce. It is worth noting that Henry Holmes was a very charming man. He had excellent manners, dressed well, knew how to behave in society, and could hold a conversation. Thanks to his skills, he easily gained people's trust. At different times, he pulled off several scams that brought him decent money, but for Henry, that wasn't enough. He dreamed of real wealth and a luxurious life, Holmes. On May 1, 1893, the World's Fair opened in Chicago, dedicated to the 400th anniversary of the discovery of America. A grand white city sprang up next to the metropolis, consisting of magnificent pavilions, luxurious parks, and shops. Here, on an area of 2.5 square kilometers, all the achievements of science, industry, and art that America was proud of at that time were gathered. Thousands of tourists from around the world came to the exhibition. Some Americans even sold their farms just to visit and see the wonders of the White City. About 27 million people visited the exhibition over 6 months, which drained the city's resources and triggered a wave of crimes, most of which the police were unable to investigate. Henry Holmes was one of those who took advantage of this. Holmes decided to expand his business and bought an empty lot across from the pharmacy. By combining the properties, he began building a hotel that the locals nicknamed the Castle. The impressive building had 3 floors. The first floor housed the pharmacy and several small shops, while the second and third floors were the hotel itself, which resembled a deadly maze more than comfortable lodging for guests. The thing is, Henry Holmes originally intended to build a hotel in which only he himself could find his way around. The man regularly changed contractors and crews during construction, so no one ever saw the full plan of the building or knew what secrets the castle's walls were hiding. And there were quite a few of them. He planned in advance that many visitors to the exhibition would look for accommodation as close to the fair as possible, knowing that among them there would be. The most vulnerable prey are lonely, naive women who would gladly follow a successful and charming doctor. Holmes bought furniture and building materials on credit, borrowed money elsewhere to pay off old debts, but sometimes he came up with much more sophisticated schemes. So, Henry ordered a huge and powerful metal safe, which was placed in the room, and only then were the walls built around it. When the owner of the company that sold the safe demanded payment, Holmes refused to pay. Then he arrived with workers to retrieve the goods. However, it was impossible to do this without destroying the building's walls. Despite his bad reputation as a swindler and a dishonest man, Holmes still finished building the hotel and furnished the rooms with decent furniture. Now he could proceed with carrying out his plan. Guests checked into the hotel, not suspecting that they had already fallen into the trap of a sadist. The first victims are considered to be the female employees who were hired by him on the condition of mandatory life insurance. After they died at Holmes' hands, the insurance payouts went directly to him. However, the owner of the castle was not satisfied with wealth alone. He wanted to use the hotel's opportunities to commit greater evil deeds. By this time, the owner of the castle was cheating on his second wife. He started an affair with a woman named Julia. She was also married. Her husband, Alex, moved into Holmes's building and started working as an accountant in the jewelry department. After learning about his wife's affair with the boss, Alex quit his job and left the city. Leaving his wife with her daughter Pearl, Julia continued her relationship with Henry Holmes, staying at the hotel. By Christmas of 1891, the woman and her daughter had disappeared. Most likely they became the next victims of the owner of the castle. Later at the hearing, Holmes stated that Julia was pregnant and died during an abortion, but the truth was never discovered. On the third floor of the castle, Henry Holmes installed a soundproof, airtight capsule chamber lined with steel with a gas burner. He lured the victim into the room by asking them to bring him something and explained the fire by saying there was no other light in the room. Holmes controlled the burner flame using pipes that were already connected to the chamber. The air in the chamber was burned up rather quickly. The person suffocated. After the arrest, the police found nail marks on the walls showing how desperately the victim wanted to escape from that hell. The south wing of the hotel's second floor was an endless maze of narrow, doorless corridors that twisted at strange angles. Henry Holmes designed the hotel to confuse, frighten, and prevent anyone from leaving the building alive. Inside, there were dozens of rooms connected to each other by secret corridors. In fact, you could get from one part of the house to the opposite side in a short time if you knew the layout. The corridor itself was a maze of several dozen windowless rooms, secret passages leading to brick walls, fake doors that could only be opened from the outside, and hidden staircases leading nowhere. Henry Holmes conducted cruel experiments on many of his victims. For this, he equipped the basement as a laboratory. Some hotel guests woke up not in the rooms they had rented, but on the operating table of the mad doctor from which no one ever left alive. Holmes loved experimenting on people with poisons and a wide variety of surgical instruments. Henry dissected the bodies into skeleton models, and those were sold to medical schools and universities. Holmes cremated some of his victims or placed them in a pit with lime until they completely decomposed. Henry had 2 giant furnaces and vats of acid in his arsenal. Since Holmes had been a medical student in the past, he easily managed to sell the bodies of his victims to colleagues for laboratories. As a rule, they weren't interested in where Henry got so many corpses. But if someone started asking too many questions, the owner of the castle would immediately get rid of the curious onlookers. Among the huge number of extremely dangerous rooms, one was completely isolated from the outside world. A small black room behind the wardrobe wall, with a small door in the ceiling. Holmes's victim would fall into this trap through a hatch, but there was no way to get out. The door could only be opened from the outside. The unlucky person caught in the trap would slowly die of starvation, alone and in total darkness. Holmes's castle also had iron rooms. Mostly the rooms were lined with iron for soundproofing, except for one. That single room was lined not only with sheets of iron but also with asbestos and was equipped with gas pipes. Apparently, in this terrifying room, Henry Holmes burned his victims alive. In the basement, which was set up like a laboratory, there was one of the most terrifying devices, a rack. The torturer tested how much a person could be stretched before they tore apart. He would slowly stretch people until their bones broke and then dispose of the body using acid. Apparently he got some kind of devilish pleasure from people's suffering. Colmes once mentioned that he dreamed of creating a race of giants. It was a genuine medieval torture device. One of the floors of the castle was literally filled with peepholes and secret passages to keep track of every step the hotel guests took. On the same floor there were many fake walls that opened like doors. Henry Holmes equipped most of the rooms in such a way that he could hurt a person remotely without leaving his own bedroom. The torturer also really enjoyed hanging people so much that he built a special room for it. He would put his victims to sleep and they would wake up already on the gallows. The hotel was not the only way to lure victims. Holmes placed ads in city newspapers, offering attractive young women good jobs. Henry wrote about the top secret nature of the job, as well as revenge and even his own identity. However, there were a lot of applicants. Holmes also placed ads looking for a new wife, enticing women with his high social status and irresistible charm. After getting rid of numerous employees and potential brides in his torture chambers, he decided to look for a new wife. In 1892, Holmes met a lady named Minnie Williams. She wasn't particularly attractive, but she had inherited a fortune in Texas real estate. Unfortunately, she was a simple and naive person with a childlike mind, and that made her the perfect victim. Holmes found out about this and hired Minnie as his personal secretary. Naturally, he started courting her and eventually proposed to her. Soon the girl began giving him large sums of money and transferred all her Texas property to Henry. After some time, Holmes found out that Minnie had a sister who was the heiress to a large fortune. He persuaded his beloved to invite her to. In July 1893, Nanny, Minnie's sister, decided to visit Chicago. She went there by train. Holmes met Nanny alone and said that Minnie was waiting for her at the castle. Upon arriving at the hotel, he used his twisted methods to make Nanny transfer her fortune to him, after which he got rid of the girl. One of his favorite ones, one of his terrifying methods, he forged a letter to make Minnie think that Nanny had never left her home in the South. Later that same year, Holmes took Minnie to Illinois, where he killed the girl and hid the body in the basement. After that, Henry found an insurance policy among her belongings. Minnie's brother had taken out the insurance and she was listed as the beneficiary. Driven by greed, Holmes went to Leadville, Colorado, where he shot Minnie's brother. Then he forged his wife's signature and collected the insurance payout. In October 1893, Holmes pulled off another scheme for a large sum of money. He took out 4 fire insurance policies on the hotel for a total of $25,000. The fire destroyed the 3rd floor, but most of the 2nd level remained untouched. The businesses on the 1st floor were left completely unharmed. It was clearly concluded this was arson. For this reason, the insurance companies suspected fraud and refused to pay. Soon, Henry Holmes hired an assistant, a man named Benjamin Pitzel. He was a middle-aged man, the father of a large family. Pitzel and his wife Carrie had 5 children. He traveled across half of America in search of work but never stayed anywhere for long. The family's need and desperate situation broke his spirit. The assistant often drank, but at the same time he was ready to take on any dirty or illegal job. It was in this man that Holmes found a loyal assistant. Pitzel was aware of Henry's dirty dealings, but he held on to his position and kept quiet. The hotel owner and his employees were so close that Holmes became practically a member of Pitzel's family. Henry never divorced any of his previous lovers, so it was considered that the hotel owner also had a family. Besides, all the wives lived in different cities and had no idea about each other's existence. Each of them outlived their negligent husband and lived to old age. The same can't be said about Holmes's numerous mistresses, many of whom became his victims. Soon, Holmes faced a problem. Pitzel, whom he trusted so much, began to actively express his dissatisfaction. They argued and quarreled regularly. Benjamin demanded that Henry pay him more. Holmes understood that no secret can be kept forever if 2 people know it. Besides, Peterzel could reveal the secret when he was drunk. Then Henry came up with a new cunning plan. He convinced Peterzel to insure his life in order to pull off one of the insurance scams he knew so well. Holmes promised that he would find a corpse to pass off as Peterzel, and the insurance payout would go to his wife Carrie. He agreed. When Holmes could no longer hide from angry creditors in Chicago, he decided to flee the city, taking his loyal Peterzel and his family with him. Together, they traveled around the country, pulling off small scams and taking out loans, then disappearing. Finally, Henry decided to settle down. In St. Louis, he bought a pharmacy on credit and then resold it, trying to avoid paying his debts. However, the locals quickly saw through Holmes's scam. For the first time in his life, he ended up behind bars. However, he also tried to profit from this situation. Holmes decided it was time to pull off the insurance scam with Peterzel. He shared his plan with his cellmate, the swindler and robber Marion Hedgepeth, who promised to connect Holmes with a lawyer willing to arrange the fake documents for the operation. For this service, Henry promised Marion $500 soon. Holmes was released on bail. Right after, he went to Philadelphia with Petersil and his family. There, Benjamin introduced himself as Patent Agent Perry. A month later, one of the inventors who visited the patent office discovered Perry's body on the second floor. Holmes's task was to switch the body, but in reality, the dead man was actually Petersil. Henry disfigured the body beyond recognition, making it difficult to identify. Benjamin's wife, who knew about the scheme, was sure that her husband was lying low, waiting for her along with the children and the insurance payout. So she went to the police for the identification without much persuasion, and confirmed that the deceased was indeed Perry. The insurance payout was received. Possessing a truly great gift of persuasion, Holmes assured Mrs. Petersil that she, as a widow, still didn't know about the need to go to Benjamin. After they split up, he offered to take the 2 girls and the boy, leaving the younger children with Carrie. She agreed. Subtitles. Later at the hearing, Holmes confessed that he had taken the lives of 2 children. He locked them in a large trunk after first drilling a hole to let in gas. Henry buried their naked bodies in the basement of the house he rented in Toronto. That's where the detective who was following Holmes found the dead girls. Then the investigator followed Henry to Indianapolis, where he rented a cottage. It is reported that Holmes visited a local pharmacy to buy illegal substances, which he used to take the life of Petersel's 3rd child, and a repair shop to sharpen the knives he used to dismember the body before burning it. Teeth and fragments of the boy's bones were found in the chimney of the house. Holmes didn't know he was already being hunted. He broke his promises and didn't pay Hatchpet, his cellmate, the $500. He revealed all the details about Holmes's scheme to the prison warden, who in turn passed the information to the insurance company. The insurance company turned to the best detectives at the Pinkerton Detective Agency. On November 17, 1894, Holmes was detained and arrested in Boston. During the interrogation, he confessed to insurance fraud and convinced the police that Petersil had committed suicide, but the detectives suspected that Genry was involved in the man's death. It was also unclear what happened to Benjamin's 3 children. Holmes made up different stories and contradicted himself in his statements. One of the detectives went searching, and that's when he found the charred remains of the boy in a house in Indianapolis, and the bodies of the girls were found all the way in Toronto. Investigators found several complete skeletons and numerous burned bone fragments in the Chicago castle, including those of a 14-year-old teenager. There was also a blood-stained noose and a storage room filled with quicklime. However, Holmes insisted that he had nothing to do with any loss of life. According to him, these people either took their own lives or were killed by someone else. The newspaper headlines discussed rooms of horror, and authors everywhere searched for even more deaths that Holmes might have committed as far back as 1879. Chicago police estimated his victims at 150. In Philadelphia, a Holmes museum opened for the curious, but Holmes was ready. He offered his memoirs. To justify himself, Henry, at the age of 34, wrote his own story of Holmes, in which the alleged criminal tells about 22 tragic deaths and disappearances in which he was involved. As an appendix, he included his prison diary, which, according to the investigator, he made up rather than kept as a daily journal. The diary is a dull account of his daily routine, probably intended to make him appear like an ordinary person interested in books and to present Henry as calm and interesting. He regarded all of this as a literary work, in line with his narcissistic temperament, and claimed that he wrote the memoirs maturely, thoughtfully, and against the protests of his lawyer and acquaintances. Holmes claimed that the crimes he was accused of were an attempt to ensure that his trial would not be fair and impartial. He said that he did not commit those crimes. Thus, he intended to tell the story of his life, including a full disclosure of his relationship with the Pitzel family. My only purpose in this publication is to clear my name from the terrible slanders made against me and to appeal to the impartial American public to suspend the legal proceedings. In these memoirs, which he asked a journalist to help him publish, Holmes describes the Gilmanton Academy in New Hampshire, the town where he grew up, as Herman Webster Mudgett. He was born there in 1861 and claims that he lived an ordinary life with ordinary parents and a regular school routine. The investigator disputes this. Experts classify Holmes as a pure psychopath. He called the corpses material, and no clear motive could be found in his actions. The fate of the maniac was largely determined by his childhood. Holmes continues to write his memoirs in a poor and miserable style, describing the misfortunes that befell him and the hardships he endured before meeting Benjamin Pitzel. They entered into a partnership that involved various activities, bringing financial benefit to both of them. Holmes also talks about some missing women connected to him, to assure readers that they spoke about their intention to leave and then disappeared. He also noted that many young women who did stay with him are alive and well. As for Minnie Williams, who disappeared without a trace, Holmes told a story about a woman who fell on hard times, had an illegitimate child, and was prone to taking her own life. She had an abortion, she was terribly ashamed, and she left everyone she knew. For some time the girl worked as his secretary and often had lunch at his house, which, he claimed, explained any bone remains that might have been found in the furnace. Her sister Nanny arrived and soon died. It seems that Minnie decided that Nanny liked Holmes, so she hit her with a stool and took her life. Often suffering from bouts of mania, she was capable of such things. Holmes helped Minnie put the body in a trunk and dump it into Lake Michigan. There wasn't a day or an hour since that terrible night that I didn't think about Nanny. If only I could bring Nanny Williams back to life. Then Holmes broke off all relations with Minnie. She left, and he burned the clothes she had left behind. No one ever heard anything about Minnie again. As for the situation with Pitzel, Holmes said that he valued him more alive than dead, so why would he take part in ending his life? In conclusion, I want to say that I am just an ordinary person. To plan and carry out such a large number of crimes attributed to me would have been completely beyond my abilities. He asked the general public to refrain from passing judgment on his innocence or guilt until he could refute them in court. Henry will also work to restore justice for those whose misdeeds I am suffering for today. However, this publication was so blatantly self-serving that readers preferred the darker stories published in the newspapers. No one truly believed Holmes's own stories, although for criminologists they are an interesting collector's item. Holmes's lawyers tried to get the trial continued, but without success. In addition, there was a struggle between the authorities of Chicago and Philadelphia over who would be able to try him first, but Henry remained in Philadelphia. The trial began as scheduled on October 28 and lasted for 5 days. Henry Holmes was sentenced to death by hanging in Philadelphia, where he had gotten rid of his old loyal assistant Peter Zell. On May 7, 1896, the sentence was carried out, to the general relief and especially to the relief of the residents of Chicago. There were many rumors about that day. Some said there was lightning in broad daylight, others claimed that it was actually Jack the Ripper who was executed, but the fact that Henry Holmes remained alive without breaking his neck for almost 15 minutes after the execution fueled the belief that the evil spirit within him was too strong and could not leave so quickly. Even after the sentence was carried out, his bad reputation still stirred people's minds. For a long time, society believed that the cunning maniac managed to deceive justice and escape by passing himself off as another person. This version gained huge popularity, and in 2017 a group of scientists even decided to exhume Holmes's body to examine it. As it turned out, the conspiracy theory was just the fantasy of an excited public, and the grave did indeed contain the remains of the serial killer. Henry Howard Holmes requested to be buried in cement. He was afraid that his body would be dug up for experiments. This is where the story of the charismatic, well-educated serial killer ends. As experts note, such a temperament is very rare for serial criminals, since they are usually outcasts from the lower strata of society and severe sociopaths. The castle itself mysteriously caught fire, and the building was destroyed except for the first floor, which was saved. According to a clipping from the New York Times, 2 men were seen entering the back of the building between 8 and 9 p.m. About half an hour later, they were seen leaving the building in a hurry. After several explosions, the castle caught fire. After that, investigators found a half-empty canister of gasoline under the back steps of the building. Later, the first floor was bought out for shops, but it was sold again in 1937 to demolish the entire building and construct a new one. The hotel has long been gone. It was demolished, and a post office was built in its place.